Imagine a solitary prophet facing corrupt kings, challenging false gods, and performing miracles that defy human comprehension. This man, Elijah, was more than just a servant of God. He was an instrument of change, a symbol of spiritual courage, and a channel of divine power. At a time when the nation of Israel was drifting further from its spiritual foundations, Elijah rose as a living flame, confronting idols and calling the people back to the true God. But what makes his story even more impressive is the dramatic end of his earthly journey. Taken up to heaven in a chariot of fire, Elijah not only fulfilled his mission but also left an eternal legacy that echoes through generations. In this script, we will explore the life and challenges faced by Elijah, from the miracles at the brook of Chariot to the epic showdown on Mount Carmel. We will dive into the significant encounters that shaped his journey and the spiritual lessons he left for his successor, Elisha. Finally, we will reflect on the lasting impact of his life, an impact that has not faded with time but continues to inspire and transform lives to this day. Prepare to embark on a deep and revealing journey where God's fire not only consumed sacrifices but also illuminated the path to unwavering faith. This is the legacy of Elijah, the prophet who was taken up to heaven in a chariot of flames but whose influence has never dissipated. Elijah is a fascinating figure whose life is filled with challenges that tested both his physical and spiritual strength. From the beginning of his journey, Elijah faced times of drought and famine, but he remained steadfast in his faith. The intimate relationship he developed with God gave him the strength to overcome obstacles, even when it seemed impossible to continue. Elijah stood out not only as a prophet but as a symbol of resilience and unwavering devotion, as seen in 1 Kings 17 verse 1 when he announced to King Ahab that there would be no rain except at his word. One of the defining moments in Elijah's life was his divine provision during his stay at the brook Chariot, described in 1 Kings 17 verses 2 to 6. Isolated from the world, he was sustained by ravens that brought him bread and meat. This episode not only demonstrated God's power but also Elijah's absolute trust in his provision. When the brook dried up, Elijah followed divine instructions and went to Zarephath, where he once again experienced God's miraculous provision through the widow who took him in, 1 Kings 17 verses 7 to 16. Elijah's life was not just a series of divine interventions but also a constant struggle against forces that sought to destroy faith in Israel. The spiritual challenges were immense, with the people frequently falling into idolatry and drifting away from God. In this context, Elijah was a living flame, a prophet who kept alive the hope of a return to spiritual purity. At every step, his life was a reflection of the commitment he had to the mission given to him, as evidenced by his confrontations with kings and the prophets of other gods. Throughout his life, Elijah faced powerful enemies but never backed down. His confidence was not in human weapons but in the heavenly fire that symbolized God's power over all adversaries, as demonstrated on Mount Carmel. Even in the face of threats and dangers, Elijah remained steadfast, knowing that his journey on earth had a greater purpose. His character, shaped by trials and deep spiritual experiences, served as an example for many who came after him, including his successor, Elisha, 1 Kings 19 verses 19 to 21. Taken up to heaven in a chariot of fire, 2 Kings 2 verse 11, Elijah left behind not just a legacy of miracles and epic confrontations. He showed that no matter the challenges we face, divine provision is a reality for those who fully trust in God. Elijah's life is an invitation for all of us to reflect on our own faith and seek a deeper relationship with the Creator, trusting that He will always provide, even in the most difficult times. Elijah's journey is marked by encounters that not only changed the course of his life but also profoundly impacted those around him. One of the most moving moments was the resurrection of the widow of Zarephath's son, narrated in 1 Kings 17 verses 17 to 24. This miracle was not just a demonstration of divine power working through Elijah, but also an expression of compassion and the value of faith. The widow, who was initially without hope, experienced the restoration of her son's life, showing that God, through Elijah, cared deeply about every detail of the lives of those who sought him. Another powerful encounter was the confrontation with the prophets of Baal on Mount Carmel, described in 1 Kings 18 verses 20 to 40. This event was one of the most dramatic and significant in Elijah's life. The challenge he posed to the false prophets was a public test of God's supremacy over all idols. The climax of this confrontation came when Elijah prayed, and fire fell from heaven, consuming the sacrifice, the wood, the stones, and even the water around it. 1 Kings 18 verse 38. This episode not only demonstrated the magnitude of divine power but also Elijah's courage in defending true faith, even when he seemed to be standing alone against the crowd. These encounters are more than just stories. They are manifestations of the ongoing struggle between good and evil, between truth and falsehood. Elijah was at the center of this spiritual battle, where each victory was not just personal but a crucial step in restoring faith in Israel. The resurrection of the boy and the fire on Mount Carmel were clear signs to the people that the God of Israel was alive and actively working, bringing hope and renewal. Elijah never allowed fear or doubt to paralyze him. Every significant encounter he had was a reminder of the commitment he had to his divine mission. These moments, charged with emotion and power, shaped his identity as a prophet and reinforced his position as a spiritual leader. His life was a series of divine interventions that pointed to something much greater than himself. The glory of God being revealed through concrete actions that deeply impacted people's lives. These encounters of Elijah, especially the confrontation with the prophets of Baal, remained etched in the collective memory of Israel. They served as a constant reminder of God's unmatched power and the call for each individual to turn away from idolatry and return to the true God. Looking at these moments, it is impossible not to feel a deep admiration for Elijah, a prophet who did not hesitate to be a channel for divine fire, both literally and spiritually. After the grand triumph on Mount Carmel, where Elijah demonstrated the power of the God of Israel by challenging the prophets of Baal, 1 Kings 18 verses 20 to 40, the consequences of this act of faith quickly manifested. Jezebel, the queen who supported the worship of Baal, was furious at the defeat of her prophets and vowed to kill Elijah, 1 Kings 19 verses 1 to 2. This relentless threat from Jezebel placed Elijah in extreme danger, forcing him to flee to save his life. Elijah's flight was not only physical but also emotional and spiritual, reflecting the deep exhaustion he felt after the intense spiritual battle he had just fought. Consumed by fear and exhaustion, Elijah fled into the wilderness and in his despair, asked to die, 1 Kings 19 verse 4. This vulnerable moment showed that even the greatest prophets can face deep crises of faith and exhaustion. However, God did not abandon Elijah in his moment of weakness. An angel was sent to care for him, providing him with food and water and encouraging him to continue his journey. This divine provision, similar to what he experienced at the brook Chariot, reaffirmed that God was present even in the darkest moments of his life. Elijah's journey led him to Mount Horeb, also known as Mount Sinai, where he had a transformative encounter with God, 1 Kings 19 verses 8 to 13. On this sacred mountain, Elijah experienced God's presence in a unique way. It was not through a strong wind, an earthquake, or a fire, but in a gentle whisper that God spoke to him. This revelation showed Elijah that God's power was not only in great and dramatic events but also in stillness and silence. It was a reminder that God was always present, even when he seemed to be silent. The encounter with God on Mount Horeb revitalized Elijah and gave him new instructions for his mission. God directed him to anoint new kings and to choose Elisha as his successor, 1 Kings 19 verses 15 to 16. This new call showed Elijah that despite his fears and struggles, his mission was far from over. God had a greater plan, and Elijah still had a crucial role to play in the history of Israel. The choice of Elisha as his successor marked the beginning of a new phase in his ministry, where he would pass the mantle of spiritual leadership to the next generation. Renewed by this new divine direction, Elijah continued his journey with faith and purpose. The flight that began with fear and despair turned into a walk of renewal and hope. The encounter with God on Mount Horeb not only saved Elijah from his personal crisis but also paved the way for the continuation of his mission through Elisha. This period in Elijah's life teaches us that even in moments of greatest weakness, God is present, offering direction and renewal. The leadership transition between Elijah and Elisha is one of the most significant and symbolic moments in the biblical narrative. Elijah, already aware that his mission was coming to an end, was instructed by God to anoint Elisha as his successor, 1 Kings 19 verses 16 to 19. This act of selection was much more than a simple appointment. It represented the continuity of prophetic power and the preservation of the divine message for future generations. Elisha, upon being called, left everything to follow Elijah, demonstrating unwavering willingness and commitment to continue the Lord's work. The relationship between Elijah and Elisha was deep and marked by intense spiritual preparation. Elisha, knowing the greatness of the mission that awaited him, asked Elijah for a double portion of his spirit, 2 Kings 2 verse 9. This request reflected not only Elisha's ambition but his awareness of the enormous challenge of leading God's people in times of spiritual crisis. Elijah, understanding the seriousness of the request, replied that it would be granted if Elisha saw him being taken up to heaven. This dialogue between the two prophets symbolizes the transfer of power and the importance of spiritual vision to fulfill the divine mission. The moment of Elijah's ascension is one of the most powerful and mysterious in all of Scripture. Elijah was taken up to heaven in a chariot of fire with horses of fire in the presence of Elisha, 2 Kings 2 verse 11. This scene not only confirmed God's choice of Elisha as his successor but also left a lasting testimony of the holiness and power that accompanied Elijah's ministry. The chariot of fire, a symbol of God's power and presence, marked the end of one era and the beginning of another. Elijah did not experience a common death. Instead, he was taken directly to heaven, a unique event that underscored his importance in the divine plan. With Elijah's departure, Elisha fully assumed leadership and immediately began to demonstrate the same power that had been seen in his mentor's ministry. Elisha's first action, dividing the waters of the Jordan River with Elijah's mantle, 2 Kings 2 verses 13 to 14, served as a clear sign that Elijah's spirit now rested upon him. This smooth and powerful transition shows how God carefully prepares and passes leadership to each generation, ensuring that his work continues uninterrupted. The leadership transition between Elijah and Elisha teaches us about the importance of mentorship, commitment to the divine mission, and the continuity of God's work. Elijah carefully prepared Elisha not only through words but also through living examples of faith and power. This passing of the mantle, both literal and figurative, is an invitation for each of us to reflect on how we are preparing the next generation to continue the work entrusted to us. Elisha, equipped with Elijah's spirit, was ready to face the challenges ahead, ensuring that God's fire continued to burn in Israel. Elijah's impact on Israel and biblical history is undeniable. His ministry not only confronted the idolatrous powers of the time but also brought profound spiritual renewal to the nation. However, Elijah's legacy did not end with his ascension to heaven. He lived on through Elisha, his successor, and through the subsequent acts that restored faith in God throughout Israel. One of the direct fruits of Elijah's ministry was the purification of Israel through Jehu, the king who was anointed to end the corrupt lineage of Ahab and Jezebel, 2 Kings 9-10. This act of divine justice was an extension of the work Elijah had begun, ensuring that Baal worship was eradicated. Elisha, Elijah's successor, continued his legacy with great fervor and power. The spirit of Elijah rested upon Elisha, who performed many miracles and powerful acts, such as the multiplication of the widow's oil, 2 Kings 4 verses 1-7, the resurrection of the Shunammite's son, 2 Kings 4 verses 32-37, and the healing of Naaman, the Syrian commander, 2 Kings 5 verses 1-19. These deeds demonstrated that Elijah's legacy was more than just memories of a great prophet. It was a living and active force that continued to transform lives and guide the nation of Israel back to God's path. The spiritual lessons from the lives of Elijah and Elisha go beyond the miracles and confrontations with the prophets of Baal. They speak of the importance of faithfulness to God, even when in the minority or facing overwhelming opposition. Elijah taught us that divine provision is certain for those who fully trust in God, while Elisha demonstrated that spiritual power can be passed on and expanded from one generation to the next. Together, they show us that service to God does not depend on numbers but on the quality and intensity of faith. Taken up to heaven in a chariot of fire, Elijah became a symbol of God's transformative power and the glorious destiny that awaits those who remain faithful to the end. His name continues to be evoked as an example of unwavering devotion and spiritual courage. In the New Testament, Elijah appears alongside Moses at the transfiguration of Jesus, Matthew 17 verses 1-3, further reinforcing his position as one of Israel's greatest prophets and as a forerunner of the coming of the Messiah. This recognition shows us that Elijah's impact transcended his time and continues to influence generations. Elijah's legacy, perpetuated by Elisha, is not just a chapter in Israel's history. It is a continuous call for each of us to reflect on how we are living our faith. Are we, like Elijah, ready to defend the truth amidst opposition? Are we, like Elisha, prepared to receive and expand the spiritual legacy that has been passed down to us? The impact of Elijah and Elisha reminds us that our actions today can have eternal consequences and that we are part of a larger story where God's fire continues to burn, guiding and transforming lives. Elijah's life challenges us to reflect on our own faith and commitment. If Elijah, in the midst of a wayward nation, could trust so fully in God that he was taken up to heaven in a chariot of fire, what prevents us from living with the same intensity and purpose? Perhaps it's time to ask ourselves, are we willing to face spiritual challenges with the same courage as Elijah? Are we ready to trust in divine provision even when the brook dries up or when opposition becomes fierce? Each of us has the opportunity to leave a spiritual legacy just as Elijah did with Elisha. Whether in our family, in our community, or in the world, we can be agents of change, instruments of God to bring light where there is darkness. But for that to happen, we need to be willing to commit, to trust, and to act. The fire that descended on Mount Carmel was not just to consume a sacrifice but to ignite faith in the hearts of the people. And that same fire can burn in our hearts, guiding us and strengthening us to fulfill the mission given to us. So, what will your next step be? Are you ready to let God's fire illuminate your path and transform your life? Don't let this knowledge go to waste. Apply it, share it, and allow it to bear lasting fruit. And if you want to continue learning and growing spiritually, don't forget to subscribe to the channel, activate notifications, and follow our upcoming content. Together, we can keep the flame of faith burning and impact even more lives.